So tonight, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to talk to you about sustainable development. It's something that I've been learning about in depth for the last few months. We're going to talk about land use, water use, transport, housing, and technology, and how it's going to affect your life. So who am I? My name's Jeff Snicer. I'm from Kamloops, British Columbia. I've traveled and lived all over the world. I went to school to learn about electronics engineering. I ended up working in the oil and gas industry. And now I'm back here in Canada after living abroad for about 10 years. And I came back because of COVID, and I've got 2 young kids, and I want a beautiful, clean, prosperous Canada for those 2 boys, and that's the main reason why I'm here today doing this. So tonight we're going to talk about what is sustainable development, what does it look like. We'll talk about land and water use, housing. We'll get into smart cities, and we'll also talk about some solutions, what you can do. I'm going to make some claims tonight. The first one is that sustainable development is the most impactful change on the lives of all Victoria area residents. Second is that sustainable development can have a significant negative effect on Victoria area residents, on the economy, housing, property rights, food production. Third, sustainable development plans were not created in Canada or in Victoria, and sustainable development in Canada will not stop climate change. So, nuance alert, some of the ideas we're going to talk about are complicated, and what happens a lot in the media now is that ideas are broken down and they're framed as black or white. And there's different shades of gray. So something can be good and also be bad, but what's most important is there's a reason for all of this, and they focus on the good reasons, but no one's talking about the bad reasons. And we need to add the context to properly understand something. And the example I'll give you so you know what I'm talking about is if you go to the doctor and you say, doctor, you know, I hit my finger with a hammer. It's swollen, it hurts. And the doctor says, no problem, I'll heal that for you right now. And he cuts your arm off. He's solved the problem, right? But in context, you really just wanted an aspirin. So in that case, you know, it's true that he healed you, but it's not in the correct context. So we like to say that a lot of this stuff sounds really good, and a lot of it is good. However, we need to pay attention to the drop of cyanide in the teaspoon of sugar. Okay? We don't want to have the argument whether or not sugar is good, because sugar is good. It's the drop of cyanide that we want to pay attention to. So how many people here know what sustainable development is? Can I get a show of hands? Quite a few people. By the way, before we get going, how many people got a flyer? Is that why you're here? Because you got a flyer? Can I see a hand? A few people. How many people saw on social? Social? How many people by word of mouth? Okay, thank you. So I think a lot of times when we talk about sustainable development, we think typically it's just for the environment. That's what I always thought it was. When I hear sustainable development, I think that we're making sure the environment is clean and making sure we're not destroying the environment as humans. But it's changed. That was the old reason, and it's kind of morphed in the last 20, 30 years. The modern definition of sustainable development is basically embodied by the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations. It's 17 goals, and what I would describe it as is an integrated project management and reporting system that covers 17 different policies, goals on poverty, hunger, health, resources, energy, water, equity, gender, education, economy. It's basically everything. So it's not just the environment, and I will really try and drive that home tonight. But to understand it properly, we need to know the context. So we're going to go back in time. This is a news clipping from 1991. At that time, Bill Vander Zalm was the premier in British Columbia, and he sent some experts around British Columbia in something called the Round Table. And they were asking the residents of BC, what do you think sustainable development is? And they came up with this definition: ensuring that our use of resources and the environment today does not damage the prospect of their being used by future generations. Sounds reasonable. But at the time, even in 1991, people were pointing out that it is in fact an oxymoron. You cannot sustain something that you are developing. Think about this. If I tell you that I'm running, what am I doing? Am I running or walking? I'm walking. So if I'm sustainably developing, what am I doing? I'm sustaining. I'm not developing. So I think we need to go back a little bit further. This handsome guy here, his name is Maurice Strong. This is the very first United Nations conference on humanity and environment. And by the way, he's Canadian. He's an oil man from Alberta. He was good friends with Pierre Elliott Trudeau. After this, he later went on to be the CEO of Petro-Canada, just before the NEP, if anyone remembers that. And then he later went on to become the Secretary General of the United Nations. This is Habitat 1, which was held in Vancouver in 1976. There's Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And then in 1987, there was a report that came out on the environment called Our Common Future. And this is where they came up with the word sustainable development. This is where they coined the phrase. Then we had the roundtable in 1991. And then in 1992, something happened called the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. And everyone went there with the idea that they were going to come up with a comprehensive plan to deal with the hole in the ozone and all the garbage that was piling up in our garbage dumps, and they were going to take care of everything. Because if you remember back in the late 80s and the 90s, we had the hole in the ozone. Captain Planet was on TV. You know, they were talking about the environment quite a lot. And they came up with some ideas out of there called Agenda 21. And I won't tell you what it is. I'll let some other people tell us what it is. But at that meeting, Maurice Strong, the Canadian, who was then Secretary General of the United Nations, told us that current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class, involving high meat intake, the use of fossil fuels, electrical appliances, home and workplace air conditioning, and suburban housing, is unsustainable. So here's, again, 1992, Kamloops this week. It says, Agenda 21 will be a blueprint for global sustainable development, which will extend into the 21st century. That's why it got its name, Agenda 21. Does anybody here know what the FCM is? Few people. The FCM is the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. It's a group that was formed, I think it was in 1916, and the idea being that municipalities would get together as a group and they would advocate for municipal problems to the federal government to try and get money and funding for municipal problems. So it's kind of like speaking truth to power. And here they wrote a report for us called the Municipal Primer on the United Nations Conference of Environment and Development, and they tell us that Agenda 21 recognizes that unsustainable development includes suburban sprawl, continued dependence on the private automobile, and residential development which favors single detached homes. Something else happened in Rio. It's called the Rio Declaration. And out of that, we got some new doctrines. And one of them is that we have to now do everything through sustainable development. It says environmental protection shall constitute an integral part of the development process and cannot be considered in isolation. You must do everything through the lens of the environment. States should reduce and eliminate unsustainable forms of production and consumption. And maybe the biggest one is that we will now use the precautionary approach, and that the lack of scientific evidence will not be a reason not to do something to save the environment. So no proof is necessary. And if you summed up all these ideas, they tell us in the conclusion of this document from the FCM that we're going to be thinking globally and acting locally. And that's what they want the municipalities to do. So if we look at the federal definition, there's an act in Canada called the Federal Sustainability Act, and they tell us what sustainable development is. This is Section 5 of the Act, and it says that sustainable development is the efficient use of natural, social, and economic resources. So it's not just talking about the environment, it's talking about everything. And that the need of the government in Canada to integrate environmental, economic, and social factors in the making of all of its decisions. So sustainable development is literally everything. And then they go on to say in the very first point that the principle of sustainable development is continually evolving. So it's everything and it's nothing all at the same time. So maybe we can't really define exactly what sustainable development is, but we can define what is unsustainable because they've been telling us. Automobiles, air conditioning, appliances, eating meat, suburban homes, fossil fuels, rural living, farming, fertilizer, flying. Pretty much everything in our modern day life has been considered unsustainable at one time or another. That's our Minister of the Environment there, Stephen Gillibro. I can't pronounce his name properly. You see he's wearing the little pin on his shirt. That's the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations. And what they're showing you there is the 3 pillars of sustainable development. It's environment, social, and economic. And that nice little Venn diagram, they overlap, and right in the middle, where those 3 things converge, that's what sustainable development is. But what I'd like you to do is consider for a moment, what is the abstract concept that they're telling us here? This is the government telling us that they're going to manage this. They're telling us that a government-managed environment and government-managed social values and government-managed economy will be sustainable development. And we've reoriented our entire society and all the laws in Canada now around this idea, which cannot be defined. So is this even going to solve any of our problems? And a short answer, no. China is about 30% of the emissions of CO2. India's coming up. They're trying to develop their economies. China's busy building coal plants because they're hungry for energy. Canada's less than 2% of emissions. So even if we cut our emissions to 0 and we do everything perfectly, it's not going to stop global warming. This is what the emissions look like for the world. Not sure if you can see, but there's one of those little skinny red ones in the top left. That's Canada. And the big pink one is China. And of course, you have the United States there as well. Another thing that comes with sustainable development is a different philosophy. It's slightly different than our Western libertarian free market philosophy. It's collectivist. Because we've now accepted that the world is in crisis, there's an environmental crisis, and we all have to act to save the world. There's a collective problem, whereas normally we think about individual rights, which are clearly defined to prevent ideas like this from rolling over people's individual rights. It's defined in the Charter of Rights, the Bill of Rights. But according to the United Nations, that your rights and freedoms may in no way be exercised contrary to the purpose of the United Nations. That's the kind of thinking that you're getting with this collectivist idea. When you have a collective problem, the whole world, it's not defined. How do we know when the start point is and what the end point is? How do we know when we fix the problem? Who do you ask? There's nobody to ask because it's everybody, therefore it's nobody. So we just ask the United Nations. So what are we doing? We're basically writing ourselves a blank check for them to do whatever they want with no limits. A little bit of a recap here. Everything we have to do must be sustainable because of the climate. Comes with its own philosophy. Collective rights are greater than individual rights. We have to think globally, act locally. Sustainable development cannot be defined. It's always changing. It's new legal and legislative doctrines, precautionary principles, so there's no proof necessary required for any of this because of the environment. The plans were not conceived or written in Canada. They're all pretty much identical. Much of our modern life is considered unsustainable. It's going to result in government control of most aspects of our life, and it's not going to stop climate change. So how does it work here in Victoria? So under the, I think it's the Local Government Communities Act, can't remember right now, you're legislatively required to have something called an official community plan. And the official community plan sets the policy for the city. It's kind of like an overarching bylaw. And underneath that plan, you're going to have other plans. Like for instance, there you can see the climate leadership plan, the sustainable mobility plan, the transport plan, and I've got some other plans from Kamloops up there. And how this works is the policy direction set in the OCP, and then under that, the individual plans are used, and as long as they don't interfere with the OCP and they're generally aligned with that, you can go with those plans. But if they interfere with OCP, then you can't do those other plans. Now there's the Capital Regional District there on the same level as Victoria. And if you zoom out under British Columbia, you've got the Local Government Act, the Climate Change Accountability Act, very important, Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act, the Zero EV Act, the Carbon Tax Act. You've got the Clean BC Roadmap that was put out. If you zoom out even further, you've got the Pan-Canadian Framework, the Sustainable Development Act, which we talked about, the 2030 Emissions Reduction Plan, and of course, there's Canada online with 194 other countries implementing Agenda 21 and the Sustainable Development Goals. And it goes up to the United Nations because that's where this came from. And we all send reports to the United Nations like good school kids. It's voluntary. We all agreed to do it. But we are actually reporting to the United Nations. So why do we need to talk about this at the municipal level? Well, according to the FCM document, and they're right, but I'll just use their words, they say municipalities are also the unit of government with primary responsibility for regulating the use of land, which is true. So we need to talk about it at the municipal and the regional level because they have the jurisdiction. Here's some links. I'll make this presentation available. I guess it'll be sent out on the email list afterwards, but these links are here for you local people that you can follow up on what you've seen here tonight. There's also a list of search words in the documents, which I won't go through, but if you want to do the research, if you start looking up these words, you're going to start finding some interesting ideas. So here's an example of what sustainable development does. This is just in the news the other day, October 4th. Interior Health is the health region around Kamloops and Kelowna, and they announced that they came out with a climate change roadmap. And they were so proud. They announced that they spent hundreds of hours of collaboration and consultation with all their staff, 650 staff hours, plus they paid a consulting company. And anyways, the ER in Merritt shuts down every 7 days. Okay, they've threatened to stop paying Interior Health because they can't even keep the hospital open, yet they're spending millions of dollars on climate change. This is the consultant company based in Calgary that did their plan. So they're sending money to Alberta. It's not even a BC company. And this is what their plan looks like. There's 21 actions. The very first one is establish governance structure. What is governance? Governance is the act of governing. It's government. That's what governance is. They're establishing a little mini environmental management government within the healthcare system because now everything in interior health must be done through the lens of sustainability. In those 21 actions, do you think any of them talk about healthcare or health outcomes or patient outcomes? Not at all. It has nothing to do with healthcare. And just to give some context, this is Island Health. You guys have had a plan, I believe, since 2010. You were ahead of the curve. And this is showing the greenhouse gas reduction. So the blue one is the actual CO2 emissions. The green one is the target. So they're going to drop it down substantially here over the next 5 years. They have a target by 2030. And they've spent millions of dollars on this. So again, context. Does it make sense that the healthcare system has a dual mandate of greenhouse gas reduction and healthcare? I would want my doctor and my nurses to be thinking only about my healthcare. I don't want them to go get a medicine or a needle and go, oh, that one has more CO2. I guess I'll use the other one. And this is what's going to happen, is they're going to train everyone in the healthcare system. I don't know if it'll get to that point, but it's definitely happening through the administrative levels and probably the operational levels in the hospital. So we need to make a decision here. Is it more important to save the world? And we know that even if we did this to the whole healthcare system, it's not going to save the world, right? But what's more important, our healthcare or saving the world? I would say our healthcare is. How many people here have heard of ICLEI? A few people? So it stands for International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. It was created in 1990. This was before the Rio Summit. And it's kind of like a consulting NGO. They get money from the United Nations. And they were actually created at the United Nations in 1990. And they changed their name in 2003 to Local Governments for Sustainability. And why did they change their name? Because even back in 2003, they knew that it wasn't just the environment. It was about everything. So they had to change their name because they had a wider mandate. And by the way, you can go on the FCM website. They say they get funding directly from ICLEI Canada. Their founding document from this World Congress of Local Governments, what does it say? In order to secure an environmentally sustainable future, the world's local governments must begin to restructure social and economic life at the local level. If you have any question about what's going on with sustainable development, read that quote. They are restructuring the entire economy and social aspects of our whole society. That's what's happening. They go on to say that global environmental problems can only be solved through a restructuring of human society at the local level. ICLEI's membership, Victoria is a member of ICLEI since 2017, so is Saanich since 2014. Anybody here heard of the C40 cities? Yeah? It made the rounds on social media a while ago. So C40 cities started off, I think it's back in 2008 or something like that. It was mayors of the biggest cities, some of the biggest cities with the biggest populations, and they decided that because large cities have the biggest populations, they have such a large chunk of GDP, they also create a lot of emissions, they should all get together and see what they could do about the environment. Currently, they claim that they represent almost 1 billion people and 36% of the world's GDP. So when the C40 cities say something, we should probably take them seriously. Now, I should also tell you that I looked, and Victoria and Saanich do not have anything that I could find about C40 cities, but I was just over on the Sunshine Coast, and Gibson's just signed up with the C40 cities. I was down in Texas. Dallas is a C40 city, or they're trying to be one. Austin is a C40 city. Salt Lake City, like it goes on and on. So what does C40 cities advocate for? Not sure if you guys can read that, but it says food consumption intervention. So they have 2 targets for 2030. Up there, one says 16 kilograms of meat, and the other says 0. That's their preferred target by 2030, is that we're consuming 0 kilograms of meat. They have a consumption intervention target for textiles, so this is clothing. They say their conservative target is 8 new shirts per year, but the target that they're shooting for is only 3 new shirts per year. Private transport. The conservative target is 190 vehicles per 1,000, but they're shooting for, anybody know the number? 0. So what is climate action? Victoria has a climate plan. It's a climate action plan, and so does Saanich, so does my hometown Kamloops, so does Gibson, so does Sechelt. Everybody has a climate action plan. What is it? Well, there's some common features that they're all the same. The main purpose in these plans is to cut CO2 emissions. They advocate something called smart growth. They don't always call it smart growth, but that's what it's known as. They advocate expensive, low-carbon development, removing vehicle infrastructure, converting things into bike lanes and active transport, smart city solutions. Can't forget equity, diversity, and inclusion. I don't know what that has to do with the environment, but if you read those plans, they're almost always centered around that. And they also advocate for something called the zero waste economy and limiting consumption, just like we saw in the C40 cities. They also oppose rural development and expanding vehicle infrastructure. So in 2019, the CRD declared a climate emergency, and so did the Saanich Council, and I believe Victoria did as well. Does anybody know? I'm pretty sure they did. I read that somewhere. So this is from the UBCM. This talks about what powers the municipalities have. And it's called a state of local emergency. because it's a local municipality. So they have the power to delegate their authority as the council. They can delegate it to committees. So say if you wanted to ramrod through some environmental policies, instead of council doing it, you can just give it to the committee. You can delegate your authority. They also have the power to implement all procedures under the emergency and borrow money. So now they can borrow money for these programs. This is out of Kamloops' plan. It just talks about big moves. And I think in Kamloops, they're really trying to tell us what it is. So when we go back to the definition from ICLEI and sustainable development, the 3 pillars, societal, economical, and environmental, it's everything. These are not small changes, they are big changes, they are big moves. This is what the carbon reduction graph in Kamloops looks like. So I'll just read this out to you, it's kind of hard. On the very left at the bottom, it says 2007. And on the very right at the bottom, that's 2050. That's the time scale. 2023 is right in the middle, right where that blue graph starts going down, roughly. So the blue is emissions from vehicles. They think by 2050 it's going to go down to 0. And they think the gray there is emissions from houses. So they want to retrofit all the old homes. And now I want you guys to contrast that with the one from Saanich. Okay, the car and the house, I put that there just for you guys, but you can see it's pretty much the same plan. In fact, it's almost identical. So they have a lot of reductions coming from homes, a lot of reductions coming from vehicles, and some of those reductions are not coming from switching to EVs. A lot of those reductions are coming from getting rid of cars altogether. And they have something there called reductions from other sources. I have a sneaking suspicion I know what those other sources are, and I think it's consumption related. And by the way, this is the one for Victoria. And the scale's the same on all these charts, 2007 to 2050. So this is when I got involved. I went into the city of Kamloops and I asked some questions about this. And I said, 80% reduction by 2050, that is extreme. I don't understand how our economy and our society is going to deal with this. And they told me, well, the plan's ambitious, but we think it's actionable. We didn't make a plan that we don't think we can do. I said, okay, but I don't understand how you're going to do this. They told me it's going to be a challenge. I said, I know. It sounds very challenging. I don't know how you guys are going to get this done. 80%, it doesn't make much sense to me. And they said, well, some of the technology doesn't exist yet. I said, I know. At this point, I'm getting really worried. And that's when he told me this. The only thing we've done similar as a society is our response to COVID and the Second World War. So are you guys starting to get the picture here? Sustainable development is about everything. It's about nothing. It can't be defined. And it's going to require you making sacrifices for the collective good, which can never be defined. There's no start, there's no end. So is there evidence of consumption interventions here in Victoria? These nice little pie charts, the one in the top there, it says fresh meat and eggs. That's in the blue, and the light blue is dairy products. They've already done an inventory of how much greenhouse gases comes from your consumption of meat and dairy in Saanich. This is from the Saanich climate plan. And over here, textiles. They want to know how much goes into your shirts, because maybe they're going to try and intervene and tell you how many shirts to have. And they say here that using a consumption-based greenhouse gas inventory, our emissions nearly double. So all that money and everything they're doing, spending on reducing cars and bringing the emissions down, as soon as they look at your consumption, they go, oh, it's right back up here. I guess we have to limit your consumption. And Victoria has the same thing. It's called the Eco City Project. They're trying to do an inventory of consumption and production right now. And by the way, it's just like with things like the firearm registry, you don't look for something and register and count it unless you have an idea in the back of your mind that you're going to control it later. That's why you do it. So this is out of the Kamloops plan. It's about land use. and this is an excerpt from the municipal primer. And it says that using official plans, official community plans, they're going to delineate hard edges, and they're going to do all the development within that. They're going to make mixed use development, and they're going to promote public transit, walking, bicycle over the private automobile. That's from the FCM excerpt. It's almost word for word what they have in the Kamloops program 30 years later. So I asked City Council, I said, why don't you just copy and paste it? You could have saved all the money and paid that consultant. So I told you guys earlier about smart growth. This is the concept. It covers a lot of different things, but basically they're saying the smartest thing to do is build up, not out, set a hard boundary. You're not going to build any new infrastructure. You're going to force everybody and everything to kind of deal with what you have because it's the most efficient thing. And there's a picture there. I Googled 15-minute city. And did you guys notice anything missing in that picture? There's no cars. So this philosophy is a development philosophy they're moving away from the automobile. And we're going to see some more on that. So what is smart growth? This is from the Gibson's website. The Gibson's official community plan is called the SMART Plan. They're very proud about smart growth. And if you want to do research into this, you should just read their plan. They've listed everything out for you. It was amazing. So here they say sustainable development was coined by the Brundtland Report. Remember I told you guys about that Our Common Future report? That woman there, she's, I can't remember her first name, it's a funky Norwegian name, but her last name is Brundtland. She was the Prime Minister of Norway. I'll leave it to you guys to Google her and see what else she did in her career. But here it says that smart growth combines a number of land use and development principles to ensure that growth is fiscally, economically, environmentally, and socially responsible. Those are the three pillars of sustainable development. So smart growth is sustainable development. You guys heard of 30 by 30? Federal government wants to conserve 30% of the land and water in Canada by 2030. That's the target. Same thing in America. Biden announced the same thing. So the thing with land conservation is once you put it, if you conserve it through covenant, in this example, a covenant stays with the land forever. So once it's conserved, it can never be used for anything else. It can be sold to somebody else, but the covenant will stay with the land. So once it's been conserved, no one can farm it or use it or build on it. This is something called the Nature Trust. This is like a public-private partnership. They put 180,000 acres into conservatorship here in British Columbia. And they say here that this is done through private partnerships and other organizations with government. Has anybody heard of these guys before? Yeah. And this is from the Saanich official community plan. It says that one of their strategies is to protect and manage natural assets. So now we're looking at the environment as an asset, and the local government is trying to protect it as well as the federal and provincial government. So remember I told you guys that we have to send reports to the United Nations. This is one of the reports. It's called the Voluntary National Review. Yeah, the VNR. All the light green areas, those are areas that were conserved before. You guys can't really make that out, can you? But there's dark green areas on there. There's quite a lot of dark green. That was areas that was added after 2017. And do you notice that the conservation areas seem to follow political boundaries? Like you've got left-leaning British Columbia, very conserved. Then you've got Alberta, which seems like it's not conserved at all. And then you get into Saskatchewan, there's tons of conservation, but Manitoba, nothing. Interesting, isn't it? Can you guys see the dark green? Does it contrast there? There's quite a lot of new land that's been added. So let me clarify. I'm doing that right here on this slide. So I actually believe we have the Agricultural Land Commission. They're supposed to put land into the ALR and it stays there to produce food, which we need for food security. Okay? You have to have farmland producing food, and if you just build houses and stuff on it, it's obviously not good for our society, so we should be conserving that. But the problem is that what the ALC does is it it promotes land plots coming together, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. So you go from fewer farms into larger and larger land parcels. And then they tell the farmers, you can't build a carriage house for your kids, and the farmers get old and they can't have their kids live there with them and have a big family and look after the farm, and all the new regulations come along, gets more and more expensive. So what happens? Well, one, their land value is depressed because of that, which I actually agree with because we need food, but they can't build there, they can't have their family there, so they end up selling the land and it goes to some big global corporation, or it ends up in a land trust. And once it goes into the trust, it never gets used for farming again. So conservation is a one-way trip. It's not like you can conserve it and then later use it. It gets conserved and it's forever gone. So we should be careful about what we conserve. And then talking about land, this is a quote from the document. You can find this on the UBC website. I'll read it out to you guys here. This came from that Habitat conference in 1976. It says, "Land, because of its unique nature and the crucial role it plays in human settlements, cannot be treated as an ordinary asset. It cannot be controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth. Therefore, contributes to social injustice. If unchecked, it may become a major obstacle in planning the implementation of development." So this is kind of the basis of this thinking. Now, I don't know where you guys are in politics, but when you start talking about the accumulation of wealth and stopping that, it's kind of getting into this kind of collective socialist idea. And this coming from a world government now, and everybody's aligning with it. And we've kind of said that all the land doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to the world, so it belongs to no one. But then how do you know? Because there's no limits, we didn't define it. So who do we ask? We ask the United Nations. Is that enough yet? Is that enough? They'll let us know, right? It kind of sounds like we're giving everything over to them. Talking about water, anybody hear about the problems in Westwold this summer? So they had the resource officers going over there, shutting off the sprinklers, telling the farmers they can't water. They were showing them the charts, the levels of water in the reservoir, the groundwater level hasn't changed, it's the same. But there is a drought, there was a drought in BC. There's still water restrictions in Kamloops. The river's very low. The Salmon River was very low, but they're drawing from a ground aquifer, it's not connected to the river. But they still went out there and they shut down their water anyways. So some of the farmers could have missed their third crop, and that was the one where they would have made all the money. So even though they said, well, show us the evidence, why does the minister want to do this? They didn't show them any evidence. They don't need to. So this thing here, this is a sustainable development goal. It's called integrated water resource management. Anything that's integrated in management means first you're going to catalog it, then you're going to license and register it, and then you're going to control it. That's what integrated management is. And how's it going so far? Well, they started doing this in 2016, and I don't know for a fact that this is a direct result, but I can see the correlation. The Thompson-Nicola Regional District reports that irrigated land is down 20% from 2016. It could be for other reasons. It might be because land parcels were consolidated and there's less farmers now. Could be because land got conserved. So how is this done in British Columbia? It's through the Sustainable Water Act. This was put in 2014. I think it became law in 2016. This was done under Christy Clark, the Liberals, now the United Party. So basically the government controls all the water. The water is vested in the government. They licensed all agricultural water sources. So this is what the farmers are dealing with now in Westwold. They're currently asking all rural people to register all their domestic water wells, even though they say, don't worry, we're not going to take it away from you or restrict it. We just want you to register it now, just like they told the farmers 5 years ago. If the minister decides, this is the actual wording from the document, there's no proof necessary. We're going on the precautionary principle. That's what happened out in Westwold. And by the way, your municipalities have water licenses too. So Kamloops, for instance, our water level was really low, and they came up with these water restrictions for a level 5 drought. That's coming from this act, and that was declared by the minister, and he told Kamloops they have to restrict the water. back in my normal logical brain, I thought it was somebody that worked for the city who was going and checking the intake and saying, oh, it's getting dangerous, we need to start using less water, or, you know, there was some practical reason behind it, but it was just somebody said that in Victoria. Another part of sustainable development, to save the environment, we have to cut carbon. So we've got the BC Building Code. It's going to step up in efficiency and carbon reduction going into 2030. It's called the STEP Code. By 2030, there will be no gas. After 2030, appliances in British Columbia must be 100% efficient, all new appliances. So even if you have a home with gas, you can't buy a new gas furnace after 2030. So what's that going to force you to do? Get rid of gas and move over to electric heat pump. They want to retrofit. Remember the chart? There was residential housing and cars. One of the biggest sources of pollution, so they say, is all the old residential houses. So they want to convert 2% of all houses to efficient houses. But it's not just putting in a heat pump. They want to completely retrofit the house. They want to do the insulation, the drywall, get you to a high R rating. They want to test the house for air leaks. They want to put an EV charger. This is like $100,000 bill at least. And by the way, this is from the Saanich thing. There's a big red X. They say gas is bad. Gas is gone by 2050. It's right in the plan. So it brings up the question that if they're saying this is bad, how are they going to convince people that have already paid off their house, maybe retirees, people that have worked their whole life, they don't have the money to do this, that aren't going to do this, how are they going to get them off gas? So some people speculated there would be mandatory retrofits coming. Well, the federal government's talking about that right now. So is the provincial government. They're trying to develop a model code for existing buildings to help guide energy efficiency improvements. So basically what they said in here is if you voluntarily initiate any kind of work on your house, if you have to pull a permit, part of that is going to be retrofitting your house. So you're not going to be able to do the work unless you do it to the new code. And this here in the bottom right, that's from the Victoria Climate Plan. It says advocate for the development of a compulsory Canada-wide home energy labeling program. They want to label all the houses based on their efficiency. And this is from the Saanich Community Plan. Explore regulatory power to require efficiency and renewable energy upgrades. They're going to force you to do it. They're looking into it. 32.9, advocate for provincial support on property assessed clean energy. That's known as PACE. We're going to talk about that in a second. Remember that, PACE. Participate in retrofit code development. It's right there. I told you guys they're going to do it. They're doing it. Introduce voluntary energy benchmarking for existing buildings. So just like Victoria is advocating for, they want to do an energy label, like an Energy Smart label on your house. So there's going to be mandatory testing. So you're going to have to pay somebody to come in, put all the hoods over, they're going to test for a vacuum and look for heat and do the whole thing, and you're going to get an energy rating. Is that going to make your house cheaper or more expensive? So let's talk about PACE, property assessed clean energy. So like we talked about, these mandatory retrofits are super expensive. Nobody can afford them, but don't worry, the government has a solution for you. This little triangle, at the very top, that's first lien, second lien, and third lien. Anyone here who's ever owned a house, you probably know that when you borrow money from the bank, it's secured against your property, so the bank is first place. If anything happens, they have the ability to foreclose on you, sell that house, pay themselves. Okay, they're first place. But for some reason, the government wants to have first place. But they can't do that because the law allows the banks to do it. So they literally have to change the law for this PACE program. And they're currently doing that right now in British Columbia. So what's going to happen, you're going to end up with a situation where you'll borrow all this money, it'll be loaned out through the city will go into debt, the government will take first place lien on your house, but you won't make payments, it'll just go through your property taxes, and then when you sell the house, the loan will go with the house. But if you default, who gets your house? They're first place. I still don't understand why they need to have first place. So what's that going to do? Rent, utility costs, home prices, taxes are all obviously going up. Home affordability and ownership will be going down, but we're in a housing crisis. Is the province going to ban cars? So I got called out on this. They said, Jeff, the province is not banning cars. I said, what do you mean? Of course they are. They said, no, they're not banning cars. They're just making them illegal. I told that joke a few times. It kills every time. But this is an actual conversation I had. So when I say they're banning cars, there's no piece of legislation that says we're banning cars. But holistically, with all the incentives and disincentives, they're banning cars. Okay, let me tell you what I mean. So there's the Zero Emission Vehicles Act. The link is in this presentation. By 2040, 100% of all light duty vehicles must be entered, or they cannot be emitting, if that makes sense. They have to be zero emissions. Thank you. But BC has a plan under the clean roadmap that they actually want a 90% reduction by 2030. That's only 7 years. They also advocate for a 25% reduction in kilometers for all types of vehicles driven. So that even includes electric vehicles. It's not just internal combustion engine vehicles. They're going to increase the carbon tax to the highest in Canada. That's our plan. And they're promoting ideas like movement as a service, which we will talk about here in a second. So I think it was 2018, there was a smart city competition. Victoria entered, they were one of the finalists, and what they were talking about was movement as a service, and I'll read you the definition here. Mobility as a service represents an innovative shift from personal vehicle ownership. Okay? This definition, exactly word for word, you can find in the Kamloops plan, you can find it in the Okanagan Regional Transport Plan, it's the same. This is a concept called complete streets. A lot of people don't like all those bike lanes that are going in, and a lot of people do like them who ride bikes. So it's kind of a contentious issue, but the hallmark is you take a street like this in Kamloops that was 4 lanes, and then you turn it into a 2-lane street with a bunch of cement islands and a bike lane. You guys know what I'm talking about? And this little triangle here, it's an inverted triangle. So this is the importance of how the city will invest money. Number 1 is walking. Number 2 is cycling. Number 3 is transit, movement of goods and services, then carpooling, and at the very, very bottom, the least important thing is single occupancy vehicles. That's the one from Victoria. Look familiar? Exact same thing in Dallas, Salt Lake City, Utah, Wyoming. I went all over, it's the same. Oh, and part of that is that they're going to be reducing parking requirements. So how do you change human behavior? Is you make it more difficult for people to do things and more annoying. Get rid of the parking spaces. People drive downtown, they want to park the car, there's nowhere to park, they're going to stop driving downtown. They're going to start looking for other solutions. It's called transportation demand management. In the Kamloops plan, we've got a lot of interesting things which I struggle to understand what they have to do with the climate. Big Move 2C from our Kamloops plan says we're banning full-size vehicles from multiple urban blocks. That includes electric vehicles, it's not just internal combustion engine vehicles. They're restricting neighborhood roads to residents only. Just think, how would you do that? What would you need in place? Is there going to be a gate? Are there going to be an armed guard there? Like how are they going to do it? It's probably going to be something electronic. It'll be cheap for them to implement. You'll get a ticket in the mail, just like you see in London in the ultra-low emission zones. They're going to temporarily at first block and then convert roads. They've already done that at a school in Kamloops. And just like we talked about with the zero emission delivery zones in London, they have a proposal to do zero emission delivery zones in Kamloops. So again, how are you going to enforce that? There has to be a way to know that your car is zero emissions. So there has to be a way for them to track that, which means you have to be tracked. And here is from the Victoria plan. They want to reduce car ownership by 30%. Reduce single occupancy vehicle trips, reduce kilometers traveled, reduce vehicle ownership, if you have any doubt. So then we started asking, well, okay, we want to move to electric cars, but is it even possible? So this is a little donut graph of all the energy. This is not electricity, this is energy. So this is biofuels, petrochemicals, natural gas, and electricity. The little green one on the right here, sorry, on the left, that's electricity. And then the bottom yellow, that's natural gas, but that includes industrial use. That's all natural gas, that's not heating. And then you have the top right, that's petrochemicals, so that's your diesel and gas for industry and cars. And then at the very top, you've got biofuels. There's the Site C dam. It's not even online yet. They started talking about that in the 80s, and they're going to finish it in 2025. So this begs the question, is electrifying BC even possible? So last year we had 64 terawatt hours of electricity generated in British Columbia. That's 150 years of utility development. We got to that level, okay? And we max out in the wintertime. We maxed out in 2021. If you converted all the gas we sold, the gasoline, as an energy equivalent, it's 41 terawatt hours. If you add in all the diesel that we sold in British Columbia, it's another 22.5. You're pretty much at parity. And then this is just for heating. This is not including industrial use. So this is what the plans call for. And we're short by 87 terawatt hours. So far more than double. There's Site C there just for a reference. It's not even online yet. So I would ask you guys, do you think it's possible to electrify BC? Okay, well, don't be so negative, guys, because there's a way we can do this. I'm going to show you how. So number one, we need more electricity, so we have to increase the power, okay? So Site C is coming on, and then there's a call for power. They already know we're going to be a net importer by 2030. Whoops. We can increase efficiency. So we can start swapping things like natural gas over to heat pumps and that sort of thing. There's about a 60% savings, plus or minus. We can decrease the number of cars that are going to become electric. Then we don't have to worry about that. Go to active transport. Then we can tell those cars they're not allowed to drive very far. Then we can start getting into things like timed usage. There's certain times of the day where the load on the grid is really low. So instead of charging your car when you want, you're only going to be able to charge it when the grid lets you. And this is going to go for other things like appliances in your home. And we start talking about smart appliances. Now we're talking about smart thermostats. So did you guys see this happened in Denver, in Colorado? They rolled out, it was like 20,000 homes, had their air conditioning turned off when they were in an energy crisis. And the same thing in Europe because of the natural gas shortage. There's a limit in the summertime. Okay, there's a temperature that they're not allowed to go below with their air conditioning. It's like 27 degrees Celsius is the lowest they're allowed in the summertime. And in the wintertime, they're only allowed to go to 19. So that's how I would do it. If I had the limits of not enough electricity and physics stopping us from being efficient. And then what does British Columbia tell us the plan is? Well, they say by 2030, they want 90% of the cars converted. They want to reduce the distances traveled by 25% for the remaining cars, including electric ones. They're going to encourage mode shift, which means you're going to get rid of your car and you're going to start riding a bike. And then here they have their priorities in order. Using clean fuels is down at the bottom, that's hydrogen. Okay, they don't want you to have a car running on hydrogen. That's their very last priority. BC Hydro facts. A lot of people think the biggest draw is in the summertime, but it's actually in the wintertime. So how are we going to heat all these homes? Not very clear. There's something called the Integrated Resource Plan from BC Hydro. They did it in 2021. They came out with an update in 2023. And they tell us here in 2023, they said, don't worry, we have an energy and capacity surplus. Well, that sounds pretty good. BC Hydro is well positioned to serve our customers' province-wide electricity needs for the next decade. And then here's the qualifying language. With additional demand-side measures. Do you guys know what demand-side measures are? means reducing demand. So don't worry, we've got lots of electricity as long as you don't use it. That's literally what they're saying. That's their plan. Okay? And here, this is from their IRP. They say, we've chosen the correct amount of demand side measures, but if the government wants us to do more, it's going to increase bills for customers. We're going to have to do time varying rates and timed usage, and it's going to increase the risk to taxpayers, including more expensive options for energy in the future. And by the way, this argument always comes up. They say, don't worry about the price. The price isn't going to go up. It's hydroelectric. The price is set. What do you think demand side measures are? Just like they did with the carbon pricing, they're going to increase the price of electricity. That's a demand side measure. That's going to reduce the load. So like I told you, this plan came out in 2021. They had to do an update in 2023 because in 2 years they realized their plan was complete junk. The demand side measures weren't reducing demand, and the actual usage was going up. So they had to redo it in 2 years. And now they know we're going to be short. By 2030, we'll be a net importer, and they need to have 3,000 gigawatts on by 2029. So the future is shocking. Brownouts, most likely like California, timed usage, increased rates, mandated maximum temperatures, energy poverty. This is a poverty plan. So now that we covered that, we'll jump into smart cities. Who here knows what a smart city is? So smart meters, smart thermostats, 5G, the LED lights, cameras, radar, artificial intelligence is now being rolled out in Kelowna. They're using it for building applications. But rather than me tell you guys what it is, what I'll do is I'll play the video here. Three pillars of sustainable development. Each streetlight can gather and send information. "7 a.m. Mark's going to work. As he's walking, the lights turn on automatically." Ooh. She's looking for a parking spot, but the car already knows where to go. Need to know where to go to charge your EV? The smart city's going to tell you. Smart sidewalks. Smart garbage cans tell you when they're full. Because that's a pressing problem, right? When garbage cans are too full. Automatic sprinklers. Air smog monitoring in real time. Noise pollution, water levels. And smart meters, it gives you consumption in real time. Alerts you if there's accidents. Adjust the traffic automatically. So, what did you guys see in there? There was a creepy guy in a dark room watching you on a camera. You might save 5 minutes when you park your car. The garbage can is going to say, "Hey, I'm full." Okay.
I saw government spending go up 1,000%.
Yeah, there you go. But so some of the things they're going to tell you the smart city is going to do. It's going to improve. Like if there's an accident, for safety, it's always going to be about safety. Okay, your cities have a target for 0 accidents. It's going to be safety. And then they're going to talk about energy use and efficiency. So they're going to say by managing the traffic lights, the cars will move more efficiently. Okay? But there's not going to be very many cars in the future, so it's probably not going to be a big deal. So I guess the question with the smart city for you guys is, are you willing, like you see all that technology, it's necessarily going to track you, okay? It's going to do those things, that's true, but we need to put it in the word I used before, context, okay? Are you willing to be tracked from the moment you step outside your house?
No.
So how this is going to work is it's going to go on the 5G backbone. So how many of you have seen the 5G antennas around town? You see you got those big ugly ones there? And then you see this one here? This guy? This one's in Kamloops. This is from my neighborhood. But this one here, this picture I took was in Saanich.
Shop building?
Nope. No, it belongs to TELUS. So the very top part there, that's an antenna. That's the 5G antenna. And then you've got the power line comes down to the control module, and there's a ground cable on there. And these are every 100 meters through the neighborhoods, and they're putting them up right now. This is what Victoria looks like. Check it every week. You'll watch 20 more pop up like nothing. It doesn't take too much for them to install them. These are all owned by TELUS.
And people are paid to put them on their properties, is that correct?
That's the antennas, like if you go into downtown and on the parkades and the buildings. Yeah, you see those big antennas? People will get rent for those, absolutely. So I'm not going to talk about the health effects of 5G. I'm more concerned with the smart city aspect. But then what we should do, oh, by the way, this is a link to this map. If you guys want to look up yourself in your own neighborhood, you can. So around 2016, over the entire world, they started replacing all of the streetlights. They were old sodium pressure lamps, which are expensive. They use a lot of electricity. They create a lot of heat. They replaced them with LEDs, which I support. This one here, top right, that one's in Brock and Kamloops. It's got 2 devices on it. We're not sure what it is. This one here is in Gibson's. Took this picture with a drone. It's just got a cap on it, and that other one has some other device on it. But normally, if you see these around town, you'll notice that there's a little nodule on the top, and I want to show you what that is. So there's a socket. The important thing about these LED lights is not that they're LEDs and they're more power efficient, because they are, and that's a good thing, but they all have this NEMA socket. It's a standard socket to all devices now in the smart city. And this yellow one here is a dimming switch. So more than likely what you see on all these lights right now is just a dimming switch or a straight through plug. It's just a placeholder, okay? It's getting everybody used to seeing it there. It doesn't need to be a big plug, but it is. But how the dimming switch works, if you go into the city and you talk to them, you say, what is that? They say, oh, it's a dimming switch. So when the light goes down, the switch closes, the light turns on. When the sun comes up, it gets light outside, the switch opens. That's how it works. This is in Saanich. This was on Century Avenue, I think. And this was Hillcrest Avenue is where I took the picture of the 5G box. But you see, it's not just on those LED streetlights, it's also on the lamps inside the residential neighborhoods. Now this one I saw on Mackenzie Avenue. This is an actual device. This is not just a dimming switch. The big diamond-shaped thing, that's industrial Wi-Fi. You'll see those all over the place, totally normal. That's just how they do the communications with all the stuff in the city. But there's a device. So these devices, I've seen the same pattern in the US. I went through a bunch of cities. They have these devices up now. But you see there's a wire coming out of it going to the Wi-Fi. So it's using the old Wi-Fi system. It's not on the 5G yet. Don't know what it is, but this would be great homework for you guys that are interested to learn. Go into the city with this picture and ask them what it is. There's a whole bunch of these on Mackenzie Avenue. So this is what it could be. We've got speed monitoring, air quality, noise monitoring, 360-degree cameras, traffic analysis with radar. These are all made by a Canadian company out of Halifax called Livable Cities. And I will let them tell you guys what they do. You ready, Blaze?
Why is SmartLinks the best tool for your urban data collection? Our SmartLinks solution is extremely compact and rugged, allowing for ease of handling and transportation of hundreds of units on a single truck. These sensors were designed with reliability in mind and are suitable for the harshest environments. Our suite of city sensors can be easily and safely deployed in minutes with no tools needed. They plug directly into the streetlights you already have. The location, high on top of the streetlight, helps to prevent theft and vandalism of your sensor infrastructure. And that location gives a bird's eye perspective of the local area, making it ideal for recording many types of sensor data. From start to finish, installation per pole is less than 2 minutes.
You guys catch that? Start to finish. That includes the guy getting out of the truck, climbing up into the boom bucket, going up, taking one out, putting the other one in, boom, down. Moves over to the next light. The problem is not that there's LED lights installed. This is what I'm talking about, context. LED lights are good, they save energy. The problem is now you have the infrastructure to install everything for the smart city. That's the problem. So now that that's there, there's no barrier. There's no investment of time or energy needed for the city to come in and do an entire block or half the city. They could probably do in a week. Just send a couple crews out with the boom truck. You know, they could do a few kilometers in an afternoon.
What are the purple lights?
I've seen those. They have them in Vernon, in Topeka, Kansas. I was in Topeka, Kansas. They have them all over Topeka. I've heard different stories. I don't know. What I've heard is that they seem to be randomly placed, and they say that the bulbs there's something wrong with them and they're going to be replaced. That was the story I heard.
We didn't hear the question.
She was asking about the purple LED lights. Yeah.
I heard that they have something to do with what's been injected in some people and can monitor people that have not been injected.
I wouldn't know anything about that. I wouldn't know anything about that, but I've heard a lot of stories, but I try and stay
Yes,
grounded in the black and white.
yeah.
And a really easy thing to do is walk right into the city and say, excuse me, where's the traffic engineer or civic operations? Why is that light purple? Please explain it to me.
Yeah.
Like, they work for you guys. There's no reason why we all can't go in there and ask them tomorrow. So just keep that in mind. I'm just gonna skip past this, but he's gonna get to a point here where they show their SmartLink system. It's a computer monitoring system. And they say, don't worry, your data is safe.
Why is smart?
So this is what the radar looks like. It's millimeter wave radar. And I'm going to tell you guys this also, is that I can buy this radar for 20 bucks. I can buy a millimeter wave radar, and it's just like a battleship radar, like bing, bing, and it shows multiple objects in a room and where they are. I can buy that for 20 bucks on Amazon. The technology has advanced, okay? We're not stopping the technology. It's proliferated everywhere. But what you can do is stop how the city uses it. Stop the city from using it altogether. If you don't know, you can't stop them. And I just want to show you this last video here.
To use LTE in IoT devices, it just makes the vision of IoT happen much faster and much more seamlessly. One of the big areas of impact from LTE would be in the infrastructure of the cities, because many times we want to deploy these connected devices in remote areas and also all over. So for example, we want to have all the light bulbs that are on a freeway connected.
Okay, we can't make that out, the audio is garbled, but you guys get the idea? Like we're driving home the point that all those LED lights are there for the future installation of the smart city infrastructure. That's why they were put in. So I showed you guys what shared mobility is. It's called movement as a service. Along with that, if you read the Kelowna Regional Transport Strategy, and if you read the Kamloops Strategy, And if you read the smart city thing that Victoria almost won for movement as a service, part of that is bringing together stakeholders. So movement as a service is like an Uber. You don't own the car, you just use it. Or it's maybe ride share, like you rent the car for 30 minutes and you drive it. But part of that, they say, well, there's all these different companies and they're different systems and it's inefficient. So we want to combine everything together. They want to get all the different companies working on one data standard with one ID, and they want to combine it with the transit system. It says the same thing in Kelowna, the same thing here in Victoria, the same thing in Vancouver. So what is that actually doing? Well, it's centralizing all transport and under the control directly of the government. If you own a vehicle, you have freedom. You can get in your car and drive. If you don't like what's going on, you can leave. Say there's a lockdown, a natural disaster, an earthquake, you can jump in your car and hit the road and drive. What happens when the government is regulating only transit and one or two companies that provide all movement? They now have control of everything. And of course, you would need a digital ID and a digital wallet to access this service. So how could this be abused? Well, you could probably talk about that for an hour, but one of the examples would be out of London, the ultra low emission vehicle zone. If you drive your car in the wrong place, and it's the wrong type of vehicle, you get a fine for £12.50. If you drive too far, you're gonna get a fine. And there's certain places in the UK where if you're not from that neighborhood, you're not allowed to drive your car through there. They're forcing the traffic to go around. Even CSIS has warned us about smart cities. So the thing with smart means that it's been programmed and everything's centralized, and they want it all on one computer and one management system. So as you centralize all the power and the transport, your utilities, electricity, everything into one spot, it becomes more vulnerable. Yeah, it's easier because it's not siloed with the utility company and siloed with the transit company and siloed with personal vehicle owners. It's all in one spot. So what that does is it makes an opportunity. It makes a very juicy target to be attacked, and that's what CSIS is worried about. And CSIS recommends that before cities roll out a smart city, that they engage citizens early to ensure that you guys are aware of what they're doing. CSIS recommends that cities should be transparent with citizens about the data collected. And your cities have to tell you if they're collecting data on you through the FOI PPA Act. Okay, there should be a privacy risk assessment done on any kind of record they're keeping on anyone. They also recommend that cities should do their due diligence because a lot of these electronics are made where? China, and China is an adversary of the West, and they put little chips and things and back doors into all their equipment so that they can hack in. And wow, wouldn't that be great if they had a little spy device that could listen and track you on every single lamppost? Wouldn't that be amazing? What a gift. What a gift that would be for China.
Excuse me, I thought the American banned it, Canadian banned that, all European have banned Huawei from coming to North America.
Huawei.
Yeah, so, I mean, the thing is, when talking about spying, it was CISO, American company that got caught spying on the German. So, who's spying? It's American that do all the spying. Canadian spy on New Zealand Prime Minister.
I think the point is everybody spies on everybody.
That's right.
Yeah.
But you're going about China equipment, it's not the American equipment.
No, what they want is our government to spy on us and not the Chinese to spy on us.
No, but it's not Chinese equipment, because they banned Chinese equipment. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, they banned all the Huawei 5G because TELUS had already spent billions of dollars on it. Yeah, and they lobbied very hard, but in the end, we got rid of Huawei.
So what I'm saying to you, they're not using Chinese equipment. They're using American equipment.
You're talking about the 5G antennas. Yes, I know the 5G antennas, but what I'm talking about is all the little cameras and all the listening devices and everything that's going to be installed around the cities.
It's not going to be Chinese.
But it doesn't matter in the end whether it's Chinese or
Well,
whether
yeah, but you're pointing
I think I want to move on from this, and I appreciate your point, sir. I appreciate your point. I didn't mean to single out China. I was just using it as an example. It was just an example to make the point. So I think the main thing I want to leave with you guys is that the government can now have access to everything. So the question is, why are your councils doing this? Okay, well, number one, here in the Victoria Climate Action Plan, it's a climate action plan. It says that they're going to work with their partners to implement a smart city. It's the plan. You say, why are you guys doing this? Well, it's literally the plan. So you have to change the plan. Okay, councillors think they're doing the right thing, most of them. I don't really believe that there's a lot of evil councillors. Sure, there's probably some corrupt people somewhere, but I'm sure most councillors genuinely believe what they're doing is good. They're following their strategic plan. This is the City of Victoria's strategic plan. Number one is climate action. That's their number one priority. So when you look around what they're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing, which is what their strategic plan is. Okay? So when you go in there and you go hooting and hollering, you say, what are you doing? They just look at you like, we're literally doing our jobs. This is what we were elected to do. Their strategic plan, the OCP and everything, takes cues from the provincial government, which takes cues from the United Nations, which takes cues from the federal government and the United Nations and all these other NGOs. And it's all voluntary, they tell you. They say this is just democracy at work. It literally, it's all voluntary. It's all voluntary, but somehow we're all aligned voluntarily. Sustainability is a huge source of funding for the city. So imagine if you're a councillor and you go in and one of the councillors that's on some committee for the FCM, they say, oh, hey, have you heard about this little group, this program, we could do this, or the CAO comes in and says, if we install this new transit hub and do movement as a service, we can get a grant for $3 million. Your eyes are gonna light up and say, yeah, let's do it. You're not thinking about what I just showed you, you're thinking about the money. You're thinking about doing good things for the citizens of your city. And the other thing is everyone's doing it. Nobody's not doing it. No one's complaining. Nobody knows what to complain about. And you get good media coverage, of course. So here, I want to say this. I don't think that there is any kind of conspiracy to take your rights. Not that I can find. Maybe you guys know where it is. Let me know. I'd love to see it. But that being said, we're going forward with these plans with a single focus. And whenever you do something, whenever you change something, whenever you come up with a new technology, there's the intended effect and then there's the side effects. There's the second order effects. So by putting through all this technology in the smart city, it's necessarily going to track you. That's the secondary effect. But we're not talking about that because that's not their job. They're talking about what their job is. So we need to make their job to talk about the other side of it, and they need to balance it. So what are we going to do, guys? Well, we need a bit of a reality check because, a lot of people have just become aware of this. But the reality is it's been happening already for 30 years. Most of the infrastructure is already installed. A lot of it's already there. If you go into city council and say stop sustainably developing and rip out all the LED lights, they're probably not going to do it. It's really expensive and it'd be really hard to explain. If you go in to fight about this issue, you're swimming against the current. Definitely you're going to be the odd fish, okay? You need to be really clear what you're talking about. You don't want to go in and start hooting and hollering about 15-minute cities and walking to work and how that's horrible and riding bikes are bad for you, because that's how they're going to frame the argument, your argument, because that's probably what you sound like, unless you can clearly define what the issue is. So what I'm saying is that most of this has already happened. It's going to happen, but we could probably change how it happens, because we're a little bit late in the game now. But if we get involved, we could definitely have a voice about how this rolls out. So the action plan, don't go into city council talking about conspiracy theories, don't call them traitors and all this stuff. You're just gonna get shut down. No one's gonna listen to you. I've seen it so many times on videos. People go in and they're like, oh, you guys are a bunch of traitors, and they don't listen, and why would they? What we should be doing, if you are really interested, I'll ask right now, how many people here have been to a city council meeting? Quite a few? How many of you regularly go? Yeah? How many of you regularly watch federal politics on Facebook or Signal or something else? You don't watch the articles about Justin Trudeau and what Jagmeet Singh said? Okay. I guess we got a pretty good group here. Usually people spend a lot of their time worrying about what's happening federally, but we're not paying attention to what's going on in our own backyard. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to learn about what's happening. We need to learn the language. We need to read the strategic plan, the OCP. We have to put ourselves in the shoes of the people that are doing the job and then communicate to them on that level. Okay, talk to them in their own language. Listen to them. Find out what they're doing. And what we can do as a strategy is target the OCP. So like I said, there's the overarching bylaw. The problem with that OCP is that it's only focused on development and sustainability. It's not focused on anything else. But if it was also focused on maintaining citizens' privacy, maintaining ownership, maintaining mobility rights, things like that, then that would automatically nuke all the things that you're worried about in these other subsidiary plans. So, healthcare priorities. So what I'm suggesting is that we start speaking to our councils in language that they understand and tell them we're worried, show them how this could be misused or abused, and say that we want safeguards. We're not going to change the whole plan, we just want safeguards put in. Like where practical, effective, economically feasible, agreed upon by the community. Something along the lines of the city recognizes the rights of citizens to mobility, property ownership, just like a one-liner, because there's nothing in there about that. That's not their mandate. And then eventually you might be able to move the board over to a Victoria First ideology, but I think it's an uphill battle for Victoria, personally. So that's the end of my presentation. And show of hands, did you guys like this? Was it useful? Thank you very much. So now that you guys came out here, we all got together, you've brought everyone together, we have this amazing energy, you're all fired up, you learned something new, what are you gonna do?
Share it.
Good idea?
Find some young people.
Yes, I don't see any young people here. Are there any young? Oh, you're way in the back. It's never good when I'm the youngest guy in the room, and I'm not that young. All right, so I think, guys, I'm hoping that this does for you is it inspires you to take action on your own, to get organized. And I want to give you an example of what we're doing in Kamloops. Doesn't mean you have to do it, but I'll just tell you what we're up to, okay? So in Kamloops, what we've done is we've created an association. The reason why we created an association is because typically what people do, they go into the council, they pick an issue. Maybe what they do is they fill out some sort of petition and they say, we don't like this. And it gets on the agenda, the council says order of business, 6.2, okay, yeah, accepted, and then it goes in the garbage, never to be seen again. So all that work you did is gone. So what we're doing is we're associating so that when we bring people together, they join the association, and the association is always working on behalf, and our membership is growing, so our power is always growing. I'll get to you. We'll do questions in a second. So what I'm hoping you guys can do is start taking action yourself, and I hope that'll help you. This is the website, if you want to take note of it. It's kamloopscsc.org. If you want to see what we're up to in Kamloops. And really, guys, you just need to take the first step. I had no idea what I was doing 6 months ago when I started down this journey. I don't get paid for this. I'm just doing this because I think it's really important, and I think it's going to help put things in a perspective and context. So just take that first step, have a look around, take the next step, and see where you go. And with that, I am done. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. Thanks for coming out.
So if you have a question, please hold your hand up. I'm going to come over with the mic. I will hold on to the mic while you talk, because if you make statements, pontificate, preach, and not ask a question, you'll lose the mic. Okay. Your friend, lady.
When you're speaking about your association, I was wondering if that is a private member association, and what are your thoughts on that in terms of unifying your groups?
Can you mic me up, please?
Okay, so it's not a PMA. I'm familiar with PMAs, but I think a PMA serves a specific function so that the members can transact privately or do whatever it is that they're doing privately, and I believe that's a legal distinction. We created an association, which you're allowed to do. It's under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, freedom to associate. Anybody can do it. And we did it just to bring everybody together and keep adding. So we're taking people from all over Kamloops and putting them together. Okay? So there's thousands of people that are worried about this, and we might get 50 people one week, 100 people the next, but we're gonna keep growing the association. And the city is supposed to listen to associations. It's actually in the CAO handbook, they're supposed to listen to associations. That's why we created the association.
I hold the mic.
That's right, I forgot. Yeah, so I just wanted to say thank you so much, Jeff. I learned a lot by listening to you tonight. I am an environmentalist. I'm the kind of person who loves the idea of 15-minute cities because I love the idea of what it evokes in my mind is not having cars in the city and having very few cars. I love that idea. And what it also evokes for me is the promise of very leafy green streets, orchards and gardens and local urban farming, all of that kind of thing. And I'm assuming from what you said that none of those things are in the plans.
So there's likely something for Victoria and Saanich. Kamloops has one, it's called the Agricultural Food Plan. They've had it since 2010. They use all the buzzwords like food security, resiliency, climate change, climate impacts. They have everything in there, equity. They tried a community garden in one part of town. No one really used it. It's in a bad part of town, and I don't know what it's being used for now. Do you guys have any gardens that you're aware of in Victoria? I'm sure it's in a plan somewhere. Yeah. Yeah. So like, I think those are great things personally. I would support it 100%. And I don't see that I need to give up my freedom to travel and privacy to have that. I think I could have that and also own a vehicle. You know, and that's the world that I would want to live in, where I maintain ownership of my transportation and also have community gardens. I think we got a question up front here.
Thank you. That was a fantastic report, and also taking you hundreds of hours, and I really appreciate it. It's terrifying to me. My number one thing is freedom. So what I don't see is anything that's got anything to do with freedom in this city, and particularly the privacy part and the lack of ability to go and visit my loved ones who are far more than 15 minutes from where I live on a, almost daily basis. And so I think one of the things, and maybe you could correct me, but don't you think one of the questions we're going to have for our municipalities is, how do you plan on making it so that we can do what we do in our lives, which is drive to see our loved ones, or go on holidays, or simply have the ability to come and go as we please?
I think there's a level of disbelief that cars are being banned. When I have this conversation with people, I say they're banning cars, and they say, well, they're not. I need my car to get to work. Like they can't even comprehend a world in which you don't own a vehicle. But if you talk to people that live in the city, and I used to be one of those people, I lived in downtown Calgary for 5 years. I rode my bike everywhere. I took the C train, loved it. But I also had a car. And when I wanted to, I put my bike in my car and I drove out of the city. And I went up in the mountains, I drove to BC and did all sorts of stuff. So I think there's, it's hard because it depends on who you talk to, really. If you don't rely on a vehicle in your everyday life, you're not going to see the issue with there being no vehicles. But if you do use it like you do, it's going to be a big issue. So you have to
see my dad. I won't
I won't see anyone.
See, I don't think anyone's going to tell you you can't travel. I think that what's going to happen is that slowly over time, so I said it's the holistic thing altogether, it's going to become more and more expensive to travel. So the price of gasoline is going to increase, the carbon tax is going to go up. Then if you go to an EV, maybe you're going to be limited, and it's really interesting how they're going to do it. So it's just through a series of incentives and disincentives. But that's the real human story, and I don't think councillors are thinking about that.
And plus, I mean, you can't shop for your dentist you want to see, your lawyer you want to see. What about if you own a business and now a whole bunch of your customers, 80% of your customers are cut off? I mean, in my clinic, I see patients from all over the Capital Regional District. I could cut my income down to 30% what it is now. That's an unintended consequence that people don't think about.
Right.
I hold the mic.
Oh, you hold the mic, okay. I just want to thank you for confessing that you were an environmentalist, as I am too, and I'm somebody who's been to many a council meeting trying to create changes for a more positive, environmentally friendly future. And the confusion I got from your program was that it almost sounded like environmental isn't being really. It's being sort of like that old, it's a bad thing, where those of us who care about the environment are really being seen as maybe the troublemakers, because there are many alternatives and there are many solutions, and they are environmentally based. And you said, what does diversity and inclusion have to do with the environment? It has everything to do with the environment. If we were listening to our First Nations people, we wouldn't be in the mess we are. They were the ones that had the original solutions for how to caretake and steward our earth. So
well, I also know, like, I've been to First Nations reserves all over Canada, and they paved in the same strip malls and put in all the same stuff we did.
And that's government for you. I'm not saying that.
That's them. They did it to make money. They took advantage of technology just like we did.
I have to say that there's so, like, I see so many government projects, and what I'm fighting, I think we're all fighting with, is that the big government infrastructure projects like roads and anything related to concrete and building is where their support goes, because we're seeing it everywhere, and we're facing that problem right now in my municipality, which is Esquimalt, is they have suddenly decided that they need a public safety building, which we've somehow managed to live without all this time, above and beyond everything else that we're asking for and we need. And it's just like the priorities are really skewed, and we cannot continue with business as usual and have this attitude of entitlement that we can just...
Sorry, what's the question?
Well, the question is, like, I'm going in front of councils all the time, and I feel like I'm butting my head against the wall, that they are not about the environment. They are about supporting fossil fuels to the highest and greatest extent they can. It's not about, even though they've declared a climate emergency, it's like they're not cutting that back. So what do you suggest?
Okay, if I understand the question, there was a lot in there. And I also appreciate I love the environment too. Like, I got 2 kids. I want clean water and clean air and all that stuff, of course. Maybe we wouldn't agree on everything, but I think largely we would agree on a lot. Maybe to the extent I might disagree with you, but I want all those same things, and I think the council wants those things. But the council's doing sustainable development. Largely their decisions are guided by what's sustainable. And sometimes it doesn't make any sense because they're following sustainable development. So you said that they put in a big safety building? Is it called a resiliency hub?
No, they want to put in a huge building that's already gone for budget, and the whole hasn't even been done.
Well, they're doing the same thing right now in Kelowna. They're going to build a $250 million rec center. That's the entire tax base of Kelowna for the entire year. It's $250 million.
Infrastructure, that's
yeah.
the money's going, it's highly fossil fuel driven.
Well, the infrastructure, yeah, like, is usually built with fossil fuels, yes. But I don't see it as fossil fuel driven. I just see that as normal.
There's a huge
Maybe we could talk after and you could show me. I'd love to see what you got.
Okay,
Yeah.
question number 4.
Yeah. The buzzword is 15-minute cities. I've been in the military for 25 years, got out, and I've traveled the world. So what is a 15-minute city? Because a city in Toronto is different than London, than Wainwright, Alberta. So what is a 15-minute criteria?
Okay, so the 15-minute city is basically smart growth, but it's the concept of development where either you walk or bike ride within 15 minutes for all of your daily needs. So therefore it eliminates the need to have personal ownership of a vehicle. It eliminates all of the emissions associated with that. It also covers the way that they develop, which is up in mixed use development. So you can work on the bottom floor, live on the top floor. So you could potentially just live in 1 or 2 buildings and just go back and forth. It eliminates your need to travel all around the city. What they want to do is make zones. In each zone, there should be all the economic things, your health care, your food, your gym, your theater, all the cultural things. It's a great idea, but in reality, I mean, just look at the healthcare system in BC. They're not going to build a hospital in every 15-minute zone. That's not going to happen. Well, I don't know what it's like here, but in the interior, I can't even get a doctor. So it's a nice concept where you're going to be in this area, and then there's going to be less vehicles, so less ability to travel. And I know a lot of people are worried about this idea that if there's another lockdown, that you would be confined to that 15-minute zone. And then the excuse would be, well, why do you need to leave? Because you've got everything you need.
No, we don't have our people. The 15-minute city structure is not conducive to mental health, period.
Yeah, so but I gotta say, like, we should look at things with a balanced idea. Like, I really try and understand the other side of the argument. So I see the potential risk there, but I also see, like, I've been to places like in Bellevue, Washington, they've adopted a lot of these things. In Vancouver they have, and it's really nice. Like, it's livable. Walking around, it's green, it's nice, don't need a car. It's pretty cool. But I want to maintain the ability to leave if I want to. And that's where you have to draw the line and make the distinction.
Okay,
so
next question over
I
here.
don't argue against 15-minute cities per se.
Are you familiar with the Urban Development Institute, also known as the UDI?
Loosely, yes.
What do you think about that?
I think, is that the one that's based here in Canada?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's out of the University of Toronto.
No. It's in different cities across the country. It was founded in Ontario in about 1957, I think. But the one in BC is particularly powerful. It's the most powerful lobby for real estate and development in BC.
I can't speak authoritatively, but just generally speaking, the more that I look, the more of these organizations I find. So I'll just call it an NGO. It's a government. It's not a non-governmental organization. It's an association. It's trying to influence the way things are being done.
So it's a legally registered lobby, and
Right.
and it's an NGO, and they pretend they're an educational institute. But
Yeah.
what I really want to say is they're one of the main organizations pushing so-called sustainable development, which is actually unsustainable development, but everything from public relations is doublespeak anyway. But one of the shocking things about the UDI in BC is that many municipalities across BC, including over half of the municipalities in the CRD, are actually paying members of the development and real estate lobby. And Saanich recently withdrew. I compelled Saanich to withdraw by running for Saanich Council. My name's Sasha Izart. And that forced them to stop paying the real estate and development lobby pushing this money and a membership with it. But the CRD is a paying member. Numerous crown corporations are paying members. And like I said, over half the municipality in the CRD, including the city of Victoria, are paying members, and they're pushing this agenda.
Thank you, Sasha, and also for what you did too. I think that's a great result. So you've got the Urban Development Institute. You've got ICLEI. You've got the FCM doing the same thing. You've got even the UBCM pushes a lot of the same policies. I don't know if you just saw what came out of their big meeting there. There's literally, like, the more you look, the more and more of these influence organizations that you find, and they're providing governance, but they're unaccountable to the voters. And I agree with you, they shouldn't be in the municipalities, 100%.
Good evening. Based on your experience so far, what's your honest opinion about young people taking up this cause. I have no hope whatsoever.
Well, there's a generational gap. There is. I mean, there's. I don't know what the young kids are talking about these days. I just realized I was old the other day when I was talking to some high school kids. I had no idea what they were saying. They were using words that didn't make sense to me. And yeah, like there's a huge gap between the generations, and there's a huge gap between their parents and their kids. You know, they plug into devices and they use social media, and if you're not in tune with that, you can't speak the same language. You have no idea what they're doing. So as just a general observation, you've got sort of the general freedom movement in Canada, and you've got all the different people that work for different things. They don't necessarily do a good job of communicating, and they have to engage young people. And I think it should be the primary focus, because you know, people are retiring and moving on in their lives, and that wisdom needs to be passed on. So I think you have to make an active effort.
I live in Europe, and well, it's about 50 years ago. And 15-minute city was really, you didn't call it 15-minute city, but most of the people didn't have a car. And they were living in their apartments. And you know, if you needed to go to see your grandmother, you took a train or bus. So it's doable in Europe. But here, you know, when I came to Canada, everything is big distances, urban sprawl and everything like that. So it's like trying to bring something which is really expansive into contraction. But my question to you is that, you know, is there a country which already has all these surveillance systems? And we saw it like when the COVID happened, like what happened in China. Like I have nothing against Chinese. I don't think Chinese are trying to invade us. I think the powers to be in the West are really learning from these kind of countries which are controlling the citizens. What is your sense? What is in place right now, let's say in China, in terms of controlling their own citizen and monitoring everything? I think that's a model, possibly.
I actually recently interviewed two students that came over from China, and both of them, funny enough, were anti-vaxxers from China. Just randomly bumped into two girls, and it was completely opposite of what I was just having a discussion with them, and they're like, yeah, we didn't get vaccinated, and I was like, oh, wow. I did an interview with them, and I asked them all these questions about the social credit system and all these things we see on TV. They had no idea what I was talking about. So, you know, China's a big country. There's more than 1 billion people there. Thank you. There's a lot of people there. It is a huge country. And, you know, something that's happening in one region might not be happening in another. I'm sure they have their own regional situations. So I've seen the stuff on social media. I'm not in China. I can't verify it myself. But what I have seen looks worrisome. I can tell you that.
So I've got two questions. One is, do you believe that we should reduce our carbon emissions to net zero by 2050?
So there's net zero. So if you're using sources of energy that have a negative carbon effect, like for instance renewable natural gas has a negative carbon, I think we absolutely should do that, and I don't see any reason, because that's a very small loss. Like there's a small price increase associated with a huge gain in the carbon output. So why wouldn't we do that? That makes total sense. In context, that makes sense. Low investment of energy, low loss of freedom, nothing, and you get a huge return. Why wouldn't we do that? It's the other things that threaten to take away our freedom and mobility and put us in a situation where we're being monitored for carbon, which isn't really actually improving much. Those are the things that I'm worried about.
Well, I want to talk about freedom because I actually wrote the Sustainable Water Act. And I think that you need to be clear, at least I want to be clear, that in British Columbia, we had a law called first in time, first in right. That was the ultimate expression of freedom. That meant that someone gets a license, they have that license because they're first to get it. Anyone coming later is left with what's left in the water courses. Now, because of the droughts that we've been having for the last 10 years, it's impossible to maintain first in right, first in time, because that means that junior water users, people who got licenses 10 years ago, get cut off completely if there's a drought. And the whole idea of these water rationing plans and level 5 droughts is to allow distribution of water for not only the people first in time, but people last in time, so that at least have an equitable crack at the water supply. So people have to give up a little bit of freedom in order to collectively sort themselves out. And I don't hear that message in what you're saying. I think we've got to understand that some freedom has to be given up for the collective good, otherwise we can't make it.
Okay, I accept your argument and I agree with you 100%, but it has to be in context and it has to be based on evidence. It can't just be the decision of the minister without sending anybody out to check the actual groundwater levels. It can't just be a random decision, which is what it appears to have been in the...
That is wrong. That I was one of the people who was sent out by the minister to look at the situation, and I made a judgment in consultation with all the water users so that it was fair. There was no arbitrary decision making.
Could I speak to you after? Because it sounds like you know more about this issue than I do. And if there's something that I'm saying that's incorrect, I would love to be corrected and I would love to learn more. Could I see you afterwards? Thank you very much. What's your name, sir?
John.
John. Okay, I'll look for you after. Thank you.
Thank you.